Alongside learning what happened to Molly's dad, we get to find out how his disappearance is connected to Justin no longer being a scientist, and also Edie is forced to learn the truth about her father as Spencer makes headway in his investigation. So to start off, Spencer finds Mary Lou, who Thomas Newton was calling out to while he was being tortured, and she's become a nun. And from what it seems, she became a bit obsessed with Thomas when they met at a motel off in Kentucky. And it seems, despite knowing he was married, she made him dependent on her, seemingly through alcohol. And with that, he began to forget himself and seemingly further unraveled past whatever he was going through at the time. But for the most part, Mary doesn't really give Spencer much information. More so is Lisa in terms of getting Spencer over to England and then directing him toward Faraday, who was currently at the Hatches estate. But before we get over to what happens with Faraday, we have to go into who Danny is and also how he plays a role in Justin's life. To make a long story short, Danny is Molly's father and also was Justin's partner at the time. While she was working on her quantum fusion project, he was helping her, or else he was simply, being a good partner and supporting her. And unfortunately for him, her ambitions got him killed. She decided to work after hours, go against regulations and stuff like that, and she pretty much eradicated him with radiation to the point where he was coughing up blood, teeth was falling out, and he died. Because of this, Justin felt guilty for years, and because of that guilt, she decided, let's not get everything. Not just the guilt, but also because the DOE decided they're going to cut her contract, and pretty much between Danny dying and the DOE deciding they don't want to work with her anymore, that was the end of her career. And she decided to instead retreat back home, take care of her dad, and this is why she sounded like she was so guilt-ridden before when it comes to, having to take care of her dad and her daughter. And that's because she's still not fully over what she did to Danny. Just trying to convince Edie, as we'll get into in a minute, about her being on this project and talking about quantum fusion, it triggers her to the point where she kind of has a bit of a panic attack. And it seems that's not going to go away anytime soon. So, let's get to the final topic. Hatch is trying to make a deal with Edie, and the problem is that Edie still can't get over all that she believes Hatch has done and what he thinks about their father. Mind you, the way Hatch makes it seem, their father is the reason Edie might have had an eating disorder among other mental issues, but apparently she blocks all that out. So the only one that's really bringing Hatch to the table is Clive, who was Edie's son that she had at 16 as perhaps one of her few acts of rebellion against their father. But unfortunately, Clive is not much of an ally for Hatch because he seems to be addicted to coke amongst other drugs. But at the very least, an advocate is an advocate, and he at least gets Faraday, Justin, and Hatch to the table. But of course, things don't go easy. When it comes to Hatch, he is trying to get 85% of the company in exchange for Faraday's work. Justin is supposed to be advocating for herself and the science of it all, but between her kind of having freak out moments and also Edie having Justin's file and knowing everything she's done, Justin is seen as the weakest link, and she wants, and by she I mean Edie wants, for Justin to be off the project. And as for Faraday, he's still eccentric, and it doesn't help that when Clive mentioned that he is a recording of Thomas Newton, he and Faraday have some alone time, and between hearing Thomas Newton become human and crying over his wife, and then Clive smoking something that looks either like crack, heroin, I don't know. I don't do drugs. He blows whatever that smoke is into Faraday's face, and Faraday is very sensitive to smells. So with him getting that blown in his face, he kind of has like a very bad trip, and he ends up breaking down in tears and kind of going a little nuts. But all of that eventually doesn't matter because Spencer shows up. He reminds Edie of the deal that the CIA made with her father, and with that, Edie is put under the offense. She is forced to take whatever deal that Hatch and Faraday want, which isn't going to be 85% of Origin, but instead is like almost an even split. And because Faraday refuses to work without Justin, Justin is put on a team even though Edie doesn't really want that. But in the long run, all that matters is Spencer gets what he wants. Edie may finally have a company that's worth passing down to her son. Hatch is back in the fold, and Faraday may actually be making a bit more progress toward what he wants. Now, as for how Spencer and Faraday are going to interact with each other, because all Spencer really wants is Thomas Newton, and he sees Faraday as a means of getting to Thomas Newton, that's not clear, but as we already know, Faraday has a good sense of smell for fear, so maybe he also has one for bullshit as well. So when it comes to highlights, Clive is going to be our first highlight, and it's mostly because between the drug use, the whistling, and just getting the vibe that this show is not just going to use eccentric characters for the point of comic relief, I dig Clive. And also, when it comes to his family, the Floods, I feel like with everybody that gets added into that family dynamic, with every bit of information we learn, it brings them a bit more to an interesting level. Because I can't imagine Edie having a child at 16, and it kind of brings the question of who she had the child with. And on top of that, with us learning that Hatch lost his mother around 10 or 11, because of how the father is talked about, there is always a question of was he part of it? What did he do in response to it? And of course, there's still the question of why, out of all people, was Hatch and Edie's father chosen to take on Origin and be the CIA's contact and manage all those patents? There's a lot of questions to ask, and I won't say we're necessarily getting answers anytime soon, but at the same time, it's still keeping you interested without feeling like it's dragging things out. Which is also something we can say about Justin. Justin, as of this point, like before this episode, she was kind of bland, and don't get me wrong, I understand that she was very much leaning on her father, to have some type of purpose in life versus the work she was doing. And of course, there was some remorse about her not being all she could have been with the education she had. But I think with learning about Danny, it added in some much needed layers so that she wasn't this, martyr or type of saint who was taking care of her dad, her son, working a terrible job, all so that they can have a decent or at least some type of a stable life, even if she was flailing a bit. Now she has a bit of flaws because at one time we see that she was so ambitious that she got someone killed. And in a way that makes it so that she seems a little bit more human and less on a pedestal like the one that we see Faraday put her on, in terms of her being someone who can save the world. Because now her saving the world is a bit more of like a repentance rather than it being her living up to all that she's capable of. Which doesn't mean that we're going to play down that she is an intelligent woman, but now it seems like it has two different reasons for her to go this far and to take on this work, and it helps flesh her out a little bit. The last highlight for us is just Spencer and Faraday coming face to face. Now, do they talk much in this episode? Not at all. But my thing is, I still feel like The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think it does best if it comes off like a mini-series than like a multiple season show. So them keeping a pace where Lisa's really doing her job and getting Spencer closer and closer rather than dragging us out toward the end, it really pushes you to understand that we're supposed to take Spencer and his operation seriously. He's not a bumbling idiot just traveling around the world, hoping he finds something. He demands results, he gets results, and he moves on to the next step. And right now, he is right at Faraday, who has all this knowledge and intelligence that Spencer is not fully aware of. So it should be interesting to see how Spencer interacts with Faraday, if he decides to ever torture Faraday. And who knows, Faraday could have the ability to fight back in ways that we're not aware of right now. Because if he can do stuff like if he can fully heal Justin's father and do all that, imagine what kind of damage he can do, especially if he feels like he really needs to defend himself. I mean, if the man can produce all that gold from out his mouth, imagine if he can produce weapons, imagine if he can produce guns or anything. Because he's been on that iPad a lot and been looking over human history, so I'm pretty sure at this point he's starting to learn that there are ways that he can not only defend himself but possibly go on the offense as well. Overall, with a quick pace, answers being forthcoming, an equal amount of eccentric characters, and a compelling story, I would say The Man Who Fell to Earth has left its need for Faraday being a comic relief or even being a crutch it needs to lean on, and has shown it has so much more to offer than his zany moments.